The story of the P-38 Lightning didn't begin in a hangar filled with roaring engines or in the chaos of battle. It began in silence, in a small design office at Lockheed's Burbank plant in 1937, where a young engineer named Clarence Kelly Johnson sat hunched over a drafting table, sketching something that looked more like a machine from the future than a weapon for the present. On his paper, the shape took form: twin booms for engines, a central pod for the pilot, two tails like a trident aimed at the horizon. It was radical, it was impossible, and it would change the course of aerial warfare. That year, the U.S. Army Air Corps had issued a challenge to America's aircraft industry: build a high-altitude interceptor faster and deadlier than anything on Earth. It had to climb to 20,000 feet in 6 minutes, reach 360 miles per hour, and carry enough guns to shred bombers at a single pass. The request bordered on madness. No piston-engine aircraft in existence could do all three. But Johnson, just 27 years old, saw opportunity in the impossible. If we can dream it, he told his small team of engineers, we can build it. Lockheed's design, known internally as Model 22, was unlike anything the Air Corps had ever seen. While other companies proposed single-engine fighters, sleek, familiar, safe, Johnson's blueprint looked like two airplanes welded together. It featured twin Allison V-1710 engines, each equipped with a turbo supercharger to maintain power at high altitude. Between them sat a narrow fuselage pod housing the cockpit, nose gear, and all the armament, a 20mm cannon, and four 50-caliber Browning machine guns mounted dead center. The result was revolutionary. No need for wing-mounted guns that converged at distance. Everything fired straight ahead, at full power, from the nose. It was a weapon built for precision and for shock. When the prototype, designated XP-38, first rolled out onto the runway at March Field in early 1939, ground crews stopped and stared. "What the hell is that thing?" one mechanic whispered. The pilots used to the stub-nosed P-36 Hawks and wiry Curtiss fighters, the Lightning looked alien. All silver, stretched and angular, its twin booms gleaming in the California sun. Test pilot Ben Kelsey climbed into the cockpit, strapped in, and fired up the twin engines. The sound was unlike anything anyone had ever heard, a deep, harmonized roar that vibrated through the ground. Kelsey taxied out, throttled up, and the Lightning leapt forward. Two streaks of exhaust cut across the runway, the twin tails slicing through the morning haze. The plane climbed like a rocket. In its first test flight, it reached over 400 miles per hour, faster than any American aircraft in history. But power came with danger. On a high-speed descent later that year, Kelsey discovered a terrifying flaw. The aircraft would lock up in a dive, its controls freezing solid. He barely recovered before impact. The engineers learned the hard way about compressibility, the effect of near supersonic airflow over the wings, a mystery few had ever encountered before. The Lightning's speed had pushed into unknown physics. Despite the risks, the Air Corps was impressed. They saw in the P-38 something America had never possessed: a fighter with the range of a bomber, the gunship of a fighter, and the speed of a racer. It could fly higher and farther than any contemporary aircraft. But bringing it from prototype to production would test Lockheed's limits. The design required materials that were scarce, machining techniques that didn't yet exist, and precision assembly on a scale no one had attempted before. The company built a special production line and trained a new generation of workers, young men and women who would later call themselves the Lightning Crew. By 1940, Europe was burning. German Messerschmitts ruled the skies over France. Britain stood alone, fighting for its life. In America, the war still felt distant, but the factories in Burbank hummed day and night. P-38s were rolling out of Lockheed's hangars by the dozen, each one sleeker and faster than the last. Their skin shone like liquid mercury. Their cockpits were cramped and blistering, but they carried power that no Allied fighter could yet match. And still many doubted it. To some Air Corps officers, the Lightning was too big, too complicated, too expensive. It had twice the engines, twice the maintenance, twice the risk. It didn't fit the image of a fighter pilot's plane, that nimble single-seater dancing through dogfights. But Johnson's team knew what they were building. Wasn't a dancer. It was a hunter. The first P-38s to reach operational units went to Alaska in 1941. There, the pilots flew them through freezing fog and brutal winds, learning how to manage the twin engines and counter-rotating propellers. It could lose one engine and still fly, an unheard-of luxury for fighter pilots. "She's not a bird," one pilot wrote home. "She's a twin-tailed tiger." Then came December 7th, 1941. When the news of Pearl Harbor reached the Lockheed plant, workers stopped at their stations in stunned silence. Within hours, orders flooded in. The Lightning was no longer an experiment, it was a necessity. America needed speed, reach, and power, and the P-38 could deliver all three. Production exploded overnight. Burbank's assembly lines ran 24 hours a day. The smell of oil and aluminum filled the air. Women took over riveting, welding, painting. Johnson's once quiet design office became a war factory, and the strange twin-boom plane that had once drawn laughter was now treated with reverence. When the first combat-ready squadrons received their P-38s in early 1942, the pilots couldn't quite believe what they were being given. "It feels like you're sitting on a lightning bolt," one said after his first flight. The name stuck. On the day the first Lightnings departed for overseas service, Johnson stood on the tarmac and watched them climb into the sky. Their twin tails caught the morning sun like silver forks. Someone nearby asked, "Do you think they'll work?" Johnson didn't look away. "They'll do more than work. They'll make the enemy remember them." He was right. Within a year, the skies over North Africa would blaze with the flash of the Lightning, and the Luftwaffe would give it a name no engineer could have dreamed of: Der Gabelschwanz Teufel, the fork-tailed devil. The first time German pilots saw the P-38 Lightning, they laughed. From the cockpit of his Messerschmitt Bf-109, Oberleutnant Franz Stiegler spotted a formation of twin-boomed aircraft slicing across the Tunisian sky and thought, "What are those, bombers?" The shape was wrong, too large, too heavy-looking, too strange to be a fighter. Then one of them banked, fast and graceful, sunlight flashing off twin tails like polished blades. The laughter died. It was November 1942, Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of North Africa. For the first time in the war, American pilots and German veterans would meet face-to-face in the sky. The Luftwaffe, hardened by years over Europe, expected rookies flying inferior planes. Instead, they found something that shouldn't have existed: a fighter with the range of a bomber, the gunpower of a gunship, and the climb of a hawk. To the Americans, it was the Lightning's first real test. The journey to North Africa had been grueling. The P-38s had flown from Britain across Gibraltar to newly captured airfields carved out of sand and scrub. Mechanics slept under the wings, swatting flies, patching bullet holes with flattened beer cans. The desert heat turned cockpits into ovens. At high altitude, they froze. The pilots joked that the Lightning could roast you and freeze you in the same mission. But when the engines ignited and the twin turbochargers screamed, all the discomfort disappeared. There was nothing in the world like it. Captain Mark Shipman, one of the first Lightning pilots to reach North Africa, remembered his commander's words before their first combat mission. "You're about to meet the best the Germans have. Don't give them time to blink." The enemy came into view near Gabes, a formation of U-88 bombers with Bf-109 escorts. The Lightnings climbed to meet them, silver arrows rising into a blue sky. At first, the German pilots held formation, confident. But then the P-38s didn't dive or scatter, they turned into the attack head-on. 4 machine guns and a 20mm cannon mounted in the nose spat fire. The concentrated burst tore through the lead bomber like paper, setting its fuel tanks ablaze. The formation broke apart instantly. The Luftwaffe escort dived to engage and found themselves outmatched. The Lightning's power lay not in maneuvering tricks, but in energy. It could dive faster than any German plane, climb out of range in seconds, and attack again from above. The Messerschmitts tried to circle and dogfight, the way they always had, but the twin-boomed American fighter refused to play their game. It struck hard, vanished,
then reappeared like a ghost. Within minutes, 3 bombers and 2 fighters were down. Stiegler's gun camera footage later showed the shock on his own face. "It wasn't a bomber, it was death with 2 tails," he said afterward. For the next several months, the Lightning carved a reputation across the African desert. Its long range allowed it to escort bombers deep into Tunisia, something no other Allied fighter could yet do. It intercepted German convoys, strafed airfields, and hunted enemy transports. The Luftwaffe quickly learned to fear its silhouette. The Germans gave it a name, der Gabelschwanzteufel, the fork-tailed devil. Reports from captured pilots revealed genuine confusion. Some claimed the P-38 was 2 aircraft flying in formation until it turned. Others swore it was a new American heavy fighter, too fast to engage and too tough to kill. Its nose-mounted weapons meant every burst of fire hit dead center. No dispersion, no guessing convergence. When a P-38 opened up, the result was instant and final. But the Lightning's baptism wasn't without blood. The heat of North Africa exposed its flaws. The engines struggled in the desert climate, their turbochargers choking on dust. The cockpit's greenhouse design trapped heat. Pilots often landed drenched in sweat, dizzy from dehydration. The controls were heavy compared to the agile Spitfires and 10-9s. And when one engine failed in low-speed combat, the torque could flip the entire plane in seconds. Lieutenant Ralph McGuire, after crash landing near Beja, wrote in his diary, "She's a thoroughbred, fast, strong, but she'll kill you if you don't respect her." Still, the pilots learned. They adapted. They flew smarter. They stopped trying to dogfight and instead used the Lightning's strengths: altitude, speed, and precision. They hit from above, broke away, climbed again, and repeated the pattern until the sky was theirs. One of the most famous early victories came in January 1943, when Lightnings of the 82nd Fighter Group intercepted a formation of U-52 transports bringing supplies to Rommel's retreating Afrika Korps. The Americans attacked in waves, their cannon fire shredding the lumbering aircraft in seconds. The German ground troops watched helplessly as dozens of their transports burned across the desert. The loss was catastrophic and symbolic. The Luftwaffe's dominance in the Mediterranean was slipping away. Rommel's staff officers began calling the strange American fighter the twin-engine curse. As the Allies pushed east toward Tunisia, the P-38s flew escort for bombers hitting Axis strongholds in Bizerte and Tunis. Every mission pushed the aircraft harder, sometimes 600 miles round-trip over open sea. When the bombers returned riddled with flak holes, it was often the P-38s that kept them alive, driving off German interceptors before they could close in. The Lightning was proving something no one had expected, that range was the new currency of air power. It wasn't the plane that could turn tightest that won, but the one that could reach the farthest and hit the hardest. By the spring of 1943, the Desert Air War had changed. The Luftwaffe, once supreme, was retreating. In their reports, German intelligence officers wrote that a new kind of American fighter had appeared, one that didn't tire, didn't turn away, and seemed to be everywhere at once. They had no idea it was only the beginning. The P-38 would soon evolve from a desert predator into something even more terrifying, a long-range escort that could reach the heart of Europe, duel the best German aces at altitude, and bring the war to Germany's doorstep. For now, in the burning skies over North Africa, the fork-tailed devil had announced itself with thunder. And the Luftwaffe, for the first time, began to understand that the Americans were not just flying to fight, they were flying to win.
By the summer of 1943, the P-38 Lightning had become more than a curiosity. It was a storm front, a weapon of reach and precision that was rewriting the rules of air combat across 2 continents. From the rocky coasts of Sicily to the mountains of Italy, its twin tails glinted in the sunlight like silver forks of lightning. To the men who flew it, it was simply the ship. To the men who fought against it, it was a nightmare. The Luftwaffe called it der Gabelschwanzteufel, the fork-tailed devil. For the first time in the war, American fighters could go anywhere. The
The P-38's twin Allison V-1710 engines, with their turbo superchargers glowing cherry red, gave it power in the thin, cold air where German aircraft gasped for breath. Its range was unmatched, over 1,300 miles with drop tanks, allowing it to escort bombers deep into Axis territory long before the arrival of the Mustang. Where the Luftwaffe had once slaughtered unescorted bombers, now they faced twin-tailed guardians that refused to leave their side. In the skies above Italy, the Lightning became legend. The 1st, 14th, and 82nd Fighter Groups flew out of dusty airstrips near Foggia and Naples, launching daily missions across the Mediterranean. The pilots quickly learned to use the aircraft's strengths, not tight turns, but speed, altitude, and precision fire. A P-38 didn't need to get close to kill. Its guns were mounted in the nose, not the wings. 4.5 caliber Brownings and a 20mm cannon fired straight ahead, converging perfectly at the pilot's line of sight. When a Lightning opened fire, every round hit the same spot. A 1-second burst could rip a fighter in half or send a bomber spiraling into the sea. Captain John W. Jack Ilfrey remembered his first victory vividly. He broke left, I stayed high, and when I squeezed the trigger, I saw the flash on his canopy and then nothing but black smoke. The Germans learned quickly. They tried to dive away, but the Lightning could follow them down. They tried to climb, but its twin engines clawed through altitude faster than any single-prop fighter in the sky. And when they tried to engage head-on, the concentrated firepower of the P-38 made it suicide. For the Luftwaffe, it was humiliating. Reports began to circulate through German air commands describing a new type of American fighter with 2 tails, 1 cockpit, and twice the firepower. In frustration, some pilots began to claim it must be a secret twin fuselage bomber. Others believed it was being flown by only the most elite American aces. They weren't wrong. Among those aces was Major Richard I. Bong, a quiet farm boy from Wisconsin who flew like a man possessed. By 1944, he would become America's highest-scoring ace with 40 victories, all in the P-38. Bong treated the Lightning like an extension of his own body. He never wasted ammunition, never chased a kill he couldn't secure, and often returned with his aircraft riddled with flak, but still flying true. Then there was Thomas Maguire, the cool, calculating tactician who studied air combat like a science. His logbooks read like manuals: approach from sun, fire at 200 yards, always break away down and left. He would go on to score 38 victories, also in a Lightning. Together, they proved that the aircraft's odd design wasn't just effective, it was dominant. In Europe, the P-38s began to take on new roles: fighter bomber, reconnaissance, pathfinder. Its long range allowed it to escort B-17s over Austria, strike rail lines in Yugoslavia, and even attack targets in southern Germany. The Luftwaffe tried to counter with Me-109Gs and FW-190s, but their shorter range and weaker engines left them exposed. "That damn thing can be anywhere," one German ace complained. "When you see its tails, it's already too late." But the Lightning wasn't invincible. Over the cold skies of northern France and Germany, it faced new challenges. The P-38's turbochargers, designed for high-altitude work, struggled in frigid weather. Engines froze, cockpits turned into ice boxes. In some missions, pilots returned with frostbite on their hands and faces. The same power that gave it life could also betray it. During one mission in late 1943, an entire squadron lost power as their engines seized in the thin air above the Alps. Several planes went down before engineers in Italy finally modified the systems for better fuel management and heating. The lessons were written in blood, but they made the Lightning stronger. For every failure, there was a victory. On August 25, 1943, P-38s from the 82nd Fighter Group intercepted a formation of 50 German bombers heading towards Allied shipping near Naples. Diving from 25,000 feet, they struck with surgical precision. Within minutes, 15 bombers were burning. Not one Lightning was lost. German survivors would later describe the attack as unhumanly fast. By early 1944, the fork-tailed devil had become the symbol of American reach. Wherever the Luftwaffe appeared, it was there: Sicily, Corsica, Sardinia, the Balkans. Even German propaganda, which usually dismissed enemy technology, could not ignore it. One captured pamphlet written by a Nazi war correspondent admitted bitterly, "The Americans have an aircraft that defies imagination. It dives like a falcon, fires like a cannon, and flies twice as far as ours." When the Allies invaded Italy in September 1943, Lightning squadrons strafed columns of retreating German armor, destroyed bridges, and hunted trains with ruthless precision. The twin tails became a symbol of death for Axis troops moving in daylight. Yet to the Americans on the ground, the sight of those booms in the sky was the opposite, a promise of survival. Lieutenant Bill Downey, a soldier in the 36th Infantry Division, wrote home, "When you see those twin tails glinting in the sun, you know you're not alone." By the end of 1943, the Lightning's kill record spoke for itself. It had become the only Allied aircraft capable of long-range escort and high-speed interception, a bridge between old-world piston fighters and the jet age to come. Its silhouette haunted German pilots, who swore that even when they shot one down, two more appeared in its place. And soon, that fear would travel halfway across the world, to a different ocean, a different enemy, and a different kind of war. Because the fork-tailed devil was heading for the Pacific.
When the P-38 Lightning reached the Pacific, it was as if the aircraft had finally found the sky it was born for. The vast, endless ocean, the scattered islands, and the long, punishing distances between them. This was the Lightning's kingdom. Where other fighters gasped for range, the P-38 thrived. Its twin engines, its speed, its endurance, they made it the only machine that could truly conquer the Pacific's horizon. By mid-1943, Lightnings were arriving in squadrons at bases from New Guinea to Guadalcanal, flown by pilots who had cut their teeth in the desperate skies of North Africa. They found a different kind of war waiting for them here. The Luftwaffe's disciplined formations were gone. The new enemy was the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service, masters of maneuver and surprise. Their Zero fighters could turn tighter and climb faster at low altitude, but they were fragile, built for agility over armor. To fight them, the P-38s brought something Japan's pilots had never faced before: raw power and unrelenting range. The Lightning's presence was immediately felt. It began escorting bombers over the steaming jungles of New Guinea, where Japanese positions hid beneath canopies so thick that sunlight barely reached the ground. It strafed airfields carved into volcanic ash, shredded barges trying to resupply garrisons, and prowled the sea lanes between the islands. In these vast spaces, where pilots could fly for hours without seeing land, the P-38's twin engines were not just an advantage, they were survival. As one pilot put it, "In a Lightning, if one engine quits, you go home. In a single-engine fighter, you go swimming." The Lightning's reputation grew quickly. Japanese aircrews began reporting a strange, twin-tailed aircraft that attacked with terrifying speed and precision. They soon gave it a name of their own: Two-Headed Dragon. Unlike the Zero, which relied on fluid turns and knife-edge duels, the P-38 fought with the tactics of an eagle. It climbed above its prey, dove with all its weight, and struck once with devastating accuracy. The concentrated firepower of its nose guns meant that even a short burst could disintegrate a plane. In New Guinea, Captain Richard Bong and Lieutenant Thomas McGuire, two names that would become legend, turned the P-38 into a personal weapon of perfection. Bong was a natural, a farm kid from Wisconsin who seemed to fly by instinct. McGuire was a scientist of the air, calculating every engagement with cold precision. Both men mastered the Lightning's energy fighting style: use altitude, strike fast, never turn with the enemy. Together, they racked up scores that stunned both friend and foe.
By 1944, Bong had become America's top ace with 40 aerial victories, all achieved in a P-38. Maguire followed close behind with 38. They were the twin faces of the fork-tailed devil in the Pacific, living proof that the machine's strange design wasn't a flaw, but an advantage. Then came the mission that would etch the Lightning into legend. April 18, 1943, Operation Vengeance. American intelligence, having cracked Japan's naval code, learned that Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the architect of Pearl Harbor, would be flying from Rabaul to Bougainville to inspect frontline troops. His itinerary was precise: time of departure, route, altitude, and escort strength. This was a once-in-a-war chance. But Bougainville was over 400 miles from the nearest American base, too far for any fighter except one. Only the P-38 Lightning had the range. 18 Lightnings from the 339th Fighter Squadron were selected for the mission. They flew at wave-top height for 2 hours, radio silent, engines droning in perfect rhythm. They navigated by dead reckoning through clouds and sudden squalls until finally, on schedule to the minute, they spotted 2 Japanese bombers escorted by 6 Zeros. Yamamoto was on board one of them. The Lightnings climbed from the sea like silver phantoms. Before the Japanese even saw them, their formation shattered under a hail of .5 caliber fire. Captain Thomas Lanphier and Lieutenant Rex Barber each claimed hits on the bomber carrying Yamamoto. The G4M Betty burst into flames and spiraled into the jungle below. When word of the mission spread, it electrified the Allied world. America had avenged Pearl Harbor, and the weapon that made it possible wasn't a battleship or a bomber. It was the twin-tailed fighter no one had believed in at first. The Lightning had crossed oceans, hunted its prey, and struck with mathematical precision. From that day forward, the Lightning was feared across the Pacific. It escorted bombers over the Philippines, smashed shipping convoys off Truk Lagoon, and swept the skies clean before amphibious invasions. Its pilots learned to fight with instinctive teamwork, one pilot attacking, the other covering, both striking like the prongs of a single weapon. But the cost was high. The P-38's twin engines, though powerful, were demanding. The tropical climate corroded their cooling systems, and the aircraft's size made it a tempting target for anti-aircraft fire. Mechanics worked around the clock, often barefoot in mud to keep them flying. Many pilots died not in combat, but in storms or fuel-starved flights over the endless blue of the Pacific. Still, they flew. In the skies over the Philippines in late 1944, Bong and Maguire fought their final campaigns. Bong, after surpassing 40 kills, was pulled from combat and sent home, a hero reluctant to leave his squadron. Maguire stayed, continuing to fight with a ferocity that bordered on obsession. On January 7, 1945, while attempting to protect another pilot in combat over the Philippines, Maguire's Lightning stalled in a turn and crashed. He was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. Bong would die later that same year, testing a new jet fighter in California on the day America dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. 2 men bound by a single machine, their lives bookending the story of the Lightning. By the war's final months, the P-38 had become the workhorse of victory. It scouted ahead of bombers, dropped bombs itself, and strafed retreating convoys. It had killed the enemy's most revered admiral, swept the skies clean of opposition, and proven that range and reliability could defeat even the most fanatical air force. Japanese pilots, once mocking its size, had come to fear its silhouette. The 2 tails that looked awkward in photographs became symbols of death in motion. A captured Japanese airman later told his interrogators, "When we saw 2 tails, we prayed. It meant the mission was over." By the time Japan surrendered, more than 10,000 Lightnings had been built. They had fought in every theater, from Alaska's icy fjords to the jungles of New Guinea, from Tunisia to Tokyo Bay. And when peace finally came, the sky was quieter, emptier, as though something immense had just passed through it and was gone. In the Pacific, a new generation of fighters was already taking shape. The single-engine P-51 Mustang, the sleek jets that would define a new era. But none carried the mythic presence of the Lightning. It had been the bridge between two worlds, the last of the great prop-driven predators and the first to touch the speeds and altitudes of the jet age. To the men who flew it, it was not just a fighter. It was a companion that had carried them through the longest flights of their lives, through fear, through fatigue, through the endless blue silence of the Pacific. When veterans of the 5th Air Force gathered years later, someone asked one of the old Lightning pilots what it felt like to fly a P-38. He smiled, eyes half closed, and said softly, "Like sitting on a thunderstorm that listened to you." And maybe that was the truest description of all. The Lightning wasn't just fast or deadly, it was alive. A machine that crossed oceans, rewrote air combat, and avenged the dead. The twin-tailed devil that ruled the Pacific sky.
When the guns finally fell silent in 1945, the skies that had once roared with lightnings grew quiet. Across the Pacific, the coral runways that had once trembled under the weight of twin Allisons now echoed with the hum of new engines. Jets, sleek and hungry, heralding a new age. The P-38 Lightning, the silver monster that had ruled both Europe and the Pacific, was suddenly a relic. But it was a relic of glory and a symbol of something far greater than technology. In the hangars of the 5th Air Force, mechanics stood beside the machines they had kept alive through years of war and stared at them one last time. Some were stripped for parts. Others were pushed into the corner of airfields and left to gather dust, their twin tails glinting one final time in the sun. To the men who had flown and fought in them, it felt like saying goodbye to a living thing. The Lightning had carried them farther, faster, and higher than any propeller-driven aircraft before it. It had been their armor, their weapon, their wings, and, for many, their coffin. For Kelly Johnson and his engineers back at Lockheed's Burbank plant, the end of the war was both triumph and transition. The P-38 had proven that innovation, bold, risky, sometimes insane, could win wars. Every lesson the Lightning taught would become the foundation for the next generation of aircraft. Johnson's team would soon design the P-80 Shooting Star, America's first operational jet fighter, a direct descendant of the radical thinking that had given birth to the P-38. But even as the jet age dawned, the legacy of the fork-tailed devil refused to fade. In the Pacific, old Lightnings were pressed into service as reconnaissance aircraft. Their long range and stable flight made them perfect for mapping a world that war had scarred and scattered. Pilots who once fought for survival now flew peacefully over the same jungles and oceans, cameras replacing cannons, capturing what had been destroyed and what remained. One pilot wrote home, "It's strange, flying the same route where we used to fight, but now I see only silence. The sea has forgotten us, but the air remembers." In Europe, captured German pilots spoke with a mixture of awe and bitterness about the aircraft that had haunted their skies. "The Americans built a fighter that broke the rules," said one former Luftwaffe ace. "We studied it, but we could never understand it. It was not made for men, it was made for war itself." For years after the war, the term Der Gabelschwanz Teufel, the fork-tailed devil, remained in Luftwaffe training manuals, a reminder of the aircraft that had dominated both the high-altitude duels and the long-range hunts. And for the men who had flown her, the Lightning was more than metal. It was memory. In dusty VFW halls and reunion tents, they spoke of her as if she had been alive. They remembered the way the turbochargers whined like angry ghosts, the vibration that rattled your bones, the heat of the cockpit when the sun burned through the canopy, and the cold silence when you throttled back over endless ocean. They remembered the smell, a mix of oil, sweat, and gunpowder that clung to your flight jacket long after you landed. Major Richard Bong, Thomas Maguire, Rex Barber, Thomas Lanfear, their names were written in history.
But in every squadron there were dozens of others who never came home. Their lightnings, now rusting on forgotten runways in the Philippines, New Guinea, and the Solomons, became monuments of aluminum to courage and endurance. One Marine who had served on Guadalcanal later wrote, "When the P-38s came in low, twin tails flashing in the sun, we felt safe for the first time. You never forget that sound. The lightning's scream meant we might live another day." As the decades passed, most of the lightnings vanished. They were scrapped for aluminum, their parts melted down into peacetime machines, cars, appliances, bridges, but a few survived. In the 1960s and 70s, warbird restorers began hunting for them in the jungles and tundra where they had fallen. One was pulled from the ice of Greenland, Glacier Girl, a P-38 recovered after 50 years entombed in frozen time. When she flew again in 2002, her engines roaring across the Arctic sky, veterans wept. For them, it wasn't just an airplane flying again. It was memory, resurrection, proof that the legend still lived. Even today, historians argue about the P-38's place among the great fighters of the war. Some praise its revolutionary design, others point to its flaws, its heavy controls, its vulnerability in cold climates, its complexity. But no one denies what it achieved. It fought from the first year of America's entry into the war to the very last, in every theater, against every enemy. It killed Japan's most powerful admiral, protected convoys across the Mediterranean, strafed Rommel's columns in Africa, and escorted bombers over the Alps. It was the only fighter that could claim all of those battles as its own. The P-38 had been a machine of contradictions, graceful yet brutal, fast yet heavy, elegant yet deadly. It demanded respect from its pilots and punished arrogance. But for those who mastered it, it became unstoppable. Kelly Johnson once said, "The Lightning was like a beautiful woman. Treat her right, and she'll reward you. Treat her wrong, and she'll kill you." That was the truth every Lightning pilot carried with him, from the deserts of Tunisia to the clouds over Tokyo Bay. In the end, the P-38 Lightning was more than a weapon. It was a statement of American imagination. In a world that had been torn apart by machines of destruction, it proved that ingenuity, not numbers, could turn the tide of war. It stood for risk, for audacity, for the belief that the impossible could fly. When the last of the surviving pilots were asked what the Lightning had meant to them, one answered simply, "She was our angel and our devil, our savior in the sky." And perhaps that's why the legend endures, because in the cold light of history, the P-38 Lightning remains what it always was, an aircraft that looked like nothing else, fought like nothing else, and left behind a legacy that still flashes across the imagination like its name. The fork-tailed devil. The fighter with two hearts, two engines, and one unbreakable soul.